Hello and welcome back to a series of spooky stories, The Haunted Teaspool. This series is brought to you by all things spooky and ungodly amounts of paranormal activity. Switching it up again, the OGs that made these jewelry companies like me. They're cute, they're down here if you want a gardening break. We're back. I have tons of spooky stories from different workplaces and houses that I've lived in. This story is based on a local business I was a manager for that's located in a very old farmhouse that was converted into a retail space. It's haunted to the point that we had a nickname for the ghost and hosted ghost hunters every October. Because of the age of the house, sound traveled very easily. I could hear the creak of the front door open from anywhere in the house, typically indicating that a customer came in. I could hear footsteps throughout the different levels of the house. The main retail space was on the main floor, and we hosted events in the basement, which was an authentic Rathskeller. Rathskeller? What the fuck is that? Google. Rathskeller. A beer hall or restaurant in a basement. So a bar in a basement? Why can't we just call it a bar in a basement? I digress. While Bob mostly stayed on the staff side of the basement, which was not a part of the Rathskeller, he would frequently wander throughout the house. Was this Bob's house, by chance? The amount of eyes I felt on me in that basement was indescribable. I could feel when he was in the same room and even feel his mood. Did y'all hear the thunder? It's storming right now, and it's the perfect time to tell a spooky story. Ambiance, you know? He did not like us being on the staff side of the basement, and he would sort of transmit his displeasure about us being there, so we knew to leave. You ain't gotta tell me twice, Bob. I'm out. When this happened, I would talk to him and let him know that I'll only be there for a minute, and the feeling would typically leave. Bob, I swear to God, I don't want to be here any more than you want me to be here. Anyway, this particular morning, I was alone in the house, and I was going between the basement and the Rathskeller, setting up for a private event that night. A beer basement. I'm just gonna call it a beer basement because I feel like I'm saying that wrong. I was moving tables and chairs around when I got the feeling that he was watching me and didn't want me there. This was normal, and I said what I usually said, but the feeling intensified instead of leaving. He was sick and motherfucking tired of you being there. I began rushing around as it was continuing to increase. I even began to shake, beginning to think that something terrible was about to happen. That's when I heard the front door open upstairs, and footsteps began walking around the main retail space. Relieved that a customer showed up, I ran up those stairs so fast my heart was pounding. Only there was no one in the front entryway. Confused, I opened the front door and the only car in the lot was mine. I was so scared that I decided that Bob can have this victory. And I stayed upstairs until other stuff began to show up, so I wasn't alone in the house and could go finish setting up for the party. Bob had had enough. Bob said, "You're gonna get out of here one way or another." But he also did it in a polite manner. He didn't, really scare the shit out of you, throw stuff at you or make the lights flicker. He just made you think that someone was there so you'd get the fuck out. And for that, I say, Bob, what a kind spirit you are. Thanks for reading, and let me know if you want to hear about Bob's cologne freaking us out or how my house was built on native land directly next to a cemetery. That sounds entirely too coincidental. Anyway, rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least scary, creepy, spooky, 10 being the most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. I will see y'all at the next episode. Stay spooky, friends.
My friend's dad stalked her. He wanted to be with her. So I talked to her today about this, and she said it's perfectly fine for me to make a video about it. That man was so weird, and he would get mad or jealous over everyone that she spoke to, even as a child. She wasn't allowed to hang out with anybody. We were at school one day, walking through the lunch line, and we didn't know her dad had came to the school, but apparently he was standing outside the lunchroom watching her. We're in the line, walking up to get our lunch plates, and she turns around and tells the boy behind her to stop stepping on her shoe. All of a sudden, her dad comes storming in the cafeteria, grabs her by the arm, and starts yelling, "I told you not to be talking to any boys. You don't talk to boys." And then he drags her out the cafeteria. I just can't imagine how embarrassing and hurtful that was for her, for him to do in front of everybody. In 4th grade, her daddy starts coming in the classroom instead of going to work, and he sits in the back of the class so he can watch her. He had our teacher thinking it was for behavioral issues. Even though she hadn't gotten in trouble at school and there were no bad reports, when the teacher asked him what he was doing, why he wanted to stay, he claimed other kids told him that she'd been talking in class, but that was not true. What he did hear, though, was that another little boy in class had sent her one of those "will you go with me, check yes or no" letters, and that's why he was now sitting in our class watching her. So our teacher dealt with it for a couple of days, and by the 3rd day, she was like, "No, you got to go." Her daddy did not like that. He went to the principal, and the principal told him, "Look, you are a grown adult man. You cannot sit in this classroom all day with all these other students. The parents are going to start complaining. You need to leave." I don't know if he was just trying to watch her because of jealousy or if he was trying to embarrass her. Probably both. We could be sitting there playing and talking like kids do, and here her daddy comes out of nowhere. "What are y'all talking about? What did you just say? What did she just say? What is this about?" And we'd be like, what? We're kids just having a conversation about Play-Doh, dirt, or a worm. I don't know. He'd say, are you talking about me? What did she say about me? What did she tell you? And we'd be like, nothing. Her mom was not around. I don't know if she was alive or what happened to her, but either way, she was not present in their life. Only her father and grandmother were there, and her grandmother was just as crazy as her dad. You could tell her father had been raised by a toxic boy mother, full-fledged. That man was entitled, narcissistic, sociopathic, egotistical, arrogant bastard. So as she got older, she began to hate him more and more. So by the time we got to 7th grade, her dad was out of control. He would sit outside of school, follow the bus home, like watch her outside, who she was talking to, or she was riding her bike, just constantly watching her. And what was interesting, he did not watch her brother like that. Her brother came and went and did whatever he wanted. It was just her. He followed her around like a lovesick puppy, and it was really creepy. So at our school, our playground was in the backside of the property with a fence up, and there was like a wood line behind it. You could cross the fence, go into the woods, but we weren't allowed to go across the fence. So we're out there playing on the monkey bars, jungle gym. We get down, everybody starts running around in circles, and all of a sudden she stops and says, there's somebody standing out there. So everybody looks, and we see her dad standing out there in the woods, watching. That was the point when the teacher went in and called the principal, and they came out and told him if he didn't leave, they were going to call the cops. Because they didn't see it as him watching his child. They saw it as him spying on the children, like in a creepy pedo way. By 8th grade, he refused to let her go to the 8th grade banquet. She couldn't have a date, couldn't even go by herself. He didn't let her do anything. That really made her angry because she was the only student out of everyone who was not allowed to participate. It sucked really hard for her to be the only child who didn't get to do anything like everybody else did. I mean, I know how I felt when I couldn't go on field trips because we couldn't afford it. So to not be able to do a class event like this, that just had to hurt. Now, we couldn't go on field trips sometimes because we didn't have the money and the school couldn't pay for it. But she couldn't go on field trips because her dad wouldn't allow it. He had the money. He just didn't want her to go. And it wasn't that he just didn't want her to have friends. He wanted to control everything about her and be the only person in her life. When we get to high school, we're in 9th grade, and she's starting to get a backbone now. You know, now she's starting to talk back to him, tell him to F off, and, you know, she's starting to stand up. He don't like that at all. He wants her to submit and cower down like she did as a kid. But what he don't realize is he's pushing her away more and more every single day. And of course, in freshman year, she gets a secret boyfriend and hides it behind her dad's back because she knows she can't tell him or he'll freak out. She was able to have this boyfriend at school because the high school, they didn't play that mess like elementary school did. Her dad, he was not allowed to creep around the school or check on her in class or follow the bus home. Like, they didn't allow any of that. Now, her dad would sometimes sit out in the parking lot to see if he could get in or try to sneak around, but they wouldn't let him. The parking lot was about as far as he could get. We had security officers that would walk around the school, so if they saw him walking past the parking lot, they would stop him and send him back to his car. I'm telling you, the man was a freaking stalker. He was stalking his own daughter. So she keeps seeing her boyfriend, and eventually she starts skipping school. So then her dad starts sitting out in the high school parking lot, watching her go in and making sure she came straight out. Eventually she started changing her clothes and putting on a hoodie so she could leave out to school and stay gone and he wouldn't see her. She was doing more and more to get away from him. It was like the more he bared down on her and tried to control her, the more out of control she became. We get to 10th grade, I'm 15, she's 16, and all of a sudden one day she says, I love you and I hope you have a good year this year. And I said, what do you mean? What are you talking about? Like you going somewhere? She said, I am. I said, oh, where are you going? She said, I can't tell you, but I love you. And she gave me a hug and walked off. Next thing I knew, everybody was searching for her. The police, her family, they had a missing person report out, everything. So a couple years later, her dad tracks her down in New York with her mom's side of the family, and he sends the police there to try to bring her home. And the police tell him, she's 17. We can't do that. I mean, she's legal age. She can do whatever she wants. She's of an age to where she can say where she wants to be. You don't have custody papers. There's no court hearing, no case. We can't drag her back home. He breaks into her aunt's house and tries to physically drag her out and make her come back home, but her uncle beats his ass and sends him back to North Carolina with a black eye. He continued to stalk her at her aunt's house, but eventually she got into one of these community colleges and she disappeared again. She said what was scary is after Facebook came out, she saw where he started stalking her online. Her mom's side of the family was secretly helping her travel around so he couldn't track her down. One day I'm at the beach cleaning and I'm walking to another condo when all of a sudden I hear Lily, and when I turn around it's her. She was about 21, I think I was 19 or 20, and I just couldn't even believe it was her. It was like seeing a ghost. I was so happy that she was okay. So she told me everything that happened. We called up and we kept in contact. I asked, why didn't you tell me you were leaving that day back in high school? And she said, because I didn't want nobody to know I was leaving. I couldn't have my dad finding me. She told me how it got so much worse from him stalking her to abusing her, and eventually he began essaying her. When she turned 9, he started making her take baths with him, or he had to be in the bathroom when she washed because he claimed he had to make sure she was washing properly. She started fighting back. He would find other ways to essay her, like he had to help her change her clothes, look for ticks, or help wash her, and she was over 10. He would do things like put his hand on her leg and want her to come lay and snuggle with him on the couch. He began buying her anniversary gifts, and his jealousy got even worse. Like, he was treating her like a wife. She said when she turned 15, he gave her a box of chocolates, some jewelry, and lingerie, and he got really mad when she told him no, she didn't want that and it was inappropriate. She said, but the straw that broke the camel's back was when she turned 16, the night of her birthday. Before they went to bed, her dad asked her to come into his room and lay down with him. And then he proceeded to put his hand up her shirt. She jumped up and ran back to her room. And then he went to her room and told her that she was going to have to start pulling her weight around the house. And now that she's 16, she's going to start sleeping in his room in the marital bed because that's what dads and daughters do. And she said, no, this is not normal. You are sick. She slammed the door in his face and then he beat the door down and he was like, you are coming to my room. And she said, no, I'm not. And it was like the next day or after that she ran away. But she could tell since she was like 14, he was trying to turn her into his wife, trying to be with her. I'm just glad that she got out of there and eventually he died. So there's that.
So this lady says that when she first got married, they ended up living with her in-laws for about 2 years. She doesn't explain what they were fighting about or what happened, but she said that they ended up getting into a really big fight with the in-laws and led them into renting this really small house that was barely big enough for 4 people. So it was her daughter from another marriage, her husband, and his son from another marriage as well. Even though the kids were not blood related, they got along really well and they acted like they were actual siblings. Until this day they get along. The house that they moved into was in this really small town where like the streets were made out of dirt. Until this day there's no like pavement. It almost felt like this town was exiled from the city. Like it was literally in the middle of nowhere and only a few people lived there and a lot of them went to church every Sunday. And she explains how her and her husband, they weren't really religious, but they also didn't want to be outsiders in this small town, so they decided to join the services every Sunday. She admits that it was a little strange going to church, but they wanted to be part of the community and also they found comfort in knowing that every single person there went to church at the same time every Sunday. The streets would be alone, like you wouldn't see anybody out there. Oop, I don't know if I said this, but this happened 10 years ago, so her daughter was 6 years old at the time. She explains that in the town there's really not a lot to do, so going to church was like a family event. And even when you would go out at night like to walk around the town, the only reason there would be people out in the streets is if they were coming or going from the church. If not, everybody would basically be like locked indoors inside their house. You wouldn't see them out there like talking amongst each other. So it was like the only activity that they can do with everyone as a family. They had only been there for about a week when a new family moved into the town and they were young like them with young kids just like them and also weren't big church people just like them. So immediately they became friends. She got along with the wife, the husband got along with the other husband, and even the kids got along really well. They always had lunch together and one time they made plans to have dinner together so that they could have some beer, so they could have some carne asada, and that is what they were doing this particular night. Not the carne asada and beer bringing the cucuy into this bitch. She explains how they really wanted to have this like party at nighttime because they just needed a distraction from everything going on, and even the kids just really wanted to play along with other little kids. So they're in the middle of having this dinner, they run out of food, and she said that she remembered that she had some botanas at home, so she was gonna go and grab it. And that's when her new friend Julia, they're in Mexico, decided to walk with her to her house, and also her daughter said that she wanted to come with them. So the neighbor's kids, they had 2 boys. They were older than her husband's son and much older than her daughter, so even though they got along and played along well, it was a little hard for her daughter to keep up with them. When they get to the house, they get the botanas and they were about to walk out the door, but before they did, the little girl, the 6-year-old, asked her mom if she could stay there because she was really tired and she wanted to go to sleep. Again, the mom knew that her daughter was tired because she'd been trying to keep up with all 3 boys, so she agreed to let her stay. She even took her to her bedroom, she tucked her in, closed the door, and then her and Julia also closed the front door, and they were walking back to Julia's house that she lived like 2 houses from where she was. She also let her stay at home alone because she knew that they weren't going to be at the neighbor's house much longer, so that's also another reason why she agreed. So she explains that they're walking, and in that very small town they only had like light posts at every like 3 houses, so there was a point where there would be light and there would be like complete darkness and then light again. So as they're walking back to Julia's house, who only lived like 2 houses away from hers, they heard a big sound like if something had fallen on top of her house. So immediately they both turned to look at her house's direction. Even though it was really dark, they can still make out something that was on top of her house, and she explains that if it wasn't for Julia standing there next to her looking at the same thing that she was looking at, she would have never believed she was seeing something like this. Also because Julia was the one that later described to everybody what they had seen on top of that house. She explains that when she first saw it, she thought it was her imagination. She thought she was going crazy. She thought that maybe she was just making up figures where there was nothing because it was so dark. And that was because when they first turned around to look on top of the house to see what the fuck had landed, she said that she saw this humanoid figure. The arms were extremely long. The legs were extremely long. It was on all 4s and it was like almost like smelling down at her roof. Like it was smelling something something that they couldn't see was there. She doesn't remember who in the moment screamed or if it was both of them, but somebody screamed really loud and they both started running towards her house because obviously they wanted to get in and get the daughter from what they had seen on top. And I guess whenever they screamed, the husbands came running, the 3 boys came running right after them as well. So she's stressed out. She's trying to unlock the door, but obviously she's like all shook. And at the time she remembers that when she was trying to unlock the door, Julia was telling their husbands what they had just seen. The husbands immediately start getting like a shovel or like a hammer, whatever they could find on the floor around the house, and they just thought that maybe somebody was in the backyard, maybe somebody was inside the house, like it could be a human, even though they saw something really fucking creepy that they described as a demon. When she finally opened the door to the house, she explains how that scared her more than even looking at this thing in the roof, because when she opens the door, there's nothing wrong in the house. Like everything was as she left it. They go into the daughter's room, and that is where they don't find the daughter. The daughter is nowhere in that house. All the windows were locked. All the doors that they had locked were still locked, but there was nobody in the house, not the daughter, not anything else. Obviously now they're panicking, and Julia went outside to tell the men that the girl is not in the house. They had taken the daughter. They're screaming the daughter's name. The daughter is just nowhere to be found. By this point, the men never found anybody on the roof or the back of the house. So the 3 boys, the 2 husbands, they were running around this town screaming that little girl's name, hoping that they would find her somewhere out there. By this point, she is desperately trying to find her cell phone, knowing that she might not have service where she's at, because again, middle of nowhere, and you have to go to like specific areas to get a signal on the phone. So she's trying to look for it. Everybody's going crazy. That's when Julia ends up finding her phone, because her phone was actually ringing. She immediately hands the phone to the mom, and she gets the phone. She answers, and there is a police officer on the other end of the line. They had just found her daughter, but the daughter couldn't tell them where she lived. She only had her mom's phone number memorized. The mom tells the cops that the husband's out there looking for her, if she could tell them where he's at so that they can go and get her. Obviously the mom is thinking that the daughter was maybe in another street or like 2 streets away from them, somewhere close by. The cop says, okay, you can come for her. We're in the entrance of Vallecitos. Immediately after the cop says this, the mom stays in shock, because the entrance of Vallecitos is an hour away from where they live. She thought she was gonna faint then and there, and she even asked the cop to repeat himself, and he did say that they were at the entrance of Vallecitos. Julia ended up staying home with the kids, which I wouldn't have stayed there. I would have gone to either my house or back over there where they're about to pick up the little girl. But anyway, the mom, the dad, and Julia's husband ended up going to pick up this little girl an hour away. Her reasoning, her logic told her that whoever they were about to go meet was not her daughter. I mean, everything happened within minutes. How can she be an hour away from where they just had left her in that room? She was scared because she was thinking, what if that's not my daughter? My daughter's still missing. We're over here driving an hour away. Like, she was so scared that it wasn't gonna be her daughter, because obviously, if realistically, it couldn't be her daughter. It was impossible that that was going to be her daughter. But when they got there, she recognized her immediately. Her daughter was sitting at the hood of this police car drinking a milk and having a little bread that they had just bought her. They had to literally plead with the cops to let her go, because the cops wanted them to tell them who took the daughter. I mean, obviously she was an hour away from them, but they knew that if they described what they had seen, the cops were gonna think they're crazy, and they didn't know who to even tell them took the daughter. You know what I mean? They were just gonna sound crazy. So eventually they just let the daughter go with them. Now the daughter, she's 6 years old, and she can talk and describe things, and she says that she remembers nothing. All she remembers was going to sleep and then waking up because there were headlights of a car coming her way, and the car happened to be the police officers. And since she saw that they were police officers, she had no idea what had just happened. She was in her bed just moments ago. She told the police officers that she was lost. The daughter remembers nothing else. With time, the daughter forgot about this occurrence almost completely, and she explains that sometimes she has nightmares of this like naked humanoid walking through those streets of that town. In her dreams, this thing is smelling the air around the houses as well. What do you think happened?
The most haunted places in Michigan is known as Seven Gables Road, and there's been a ton of ghost and supernatural shows that have done episodes here. There have been a ton of people from the area that have gone there and claimed to have experiences, some of which have videos that you can find. But I got a story that was submitted to Spooky Theory Storytime from a woman and her friend who went there one night, and trigger warning, this story does end in tragedy. It's very sad, but the legend of this place is that a long time ago there was a woman who lived at the end of this road, which is about 25 miles southeast of Lansing, Michigan, and she was known around the town as a witch. And so one night all of the townspeople came down the road and they burned her house down, and she passed, and in turn she cursed the land. I couldn't verify if there's any truth to this lore or if it's just sort of the urban legend given as explanation for all of the creepy and unexplained things that happen down this road. But the only way down this road is past a red padlocked gate. It's not like anyone could just accidentally wander in. But the legend says that if you go past the gate at night and you hear the witches scream and you're the last person to cross the gate going back to your car, you will be cursed with death within 3 days. Brings us to this story, and this was submitted by someone named Christina, and she says that she used to work third shift in a nursing home in Hastings, Michigan, and she made a friend on the job, and we'll call this friend Dana. And Dana and her were both into like sort of spooky woo-woo things. We're both into like ghost hunting and paranormal type shows, and they bonded over this. And one night they actually even went together to the Ada Witch Cemetery, which was a lot closer to them than the Seven Gables Road. That was just sort of the type of friendship that they had, just to give you some context, right? So one day Christina's at the local hardware store and she runs into Dana's boyfriend, and she hadn't really seen Dana in a couple weeks. Dana had just given birth to her and her boyfriend's second child, and so she hadn't left the house much. And so, you know, Christina and Dana's boyfriend are just catching up in the store, and before Christina leaves, he's like, hey, can you do me a favor? I'll watch the two boys. Can you take her out? Like, she really needs to get out of the house. She hasn't done anything for herself since having this baby. Christina's like, say less, I got you. I would love to have girl time with my best friend. So she goes over there, and Dana is kind of reluctant to leave the house, and Christina's like, no, it's fine. He says he's going to watch the kids. Like, you and I need to get out. Let's go get some wings. Let's go get some drinks. And finally Dana's like, you know what? Yeah, I could use some time to myself. So they go to a restaurant. They're having some food. They're having some drinks. And the topic of Seven Gables Road come up. And they had talked about it a few times at work. And Dana agrees that she really wants to go. So like, do you think we could go tonight? And Dana hits up her boyfriend. She's like, hey, is it cool if you watch the kids a little bit later? He's like, yes, please go enjoy the time to yourself. And so they look up the place, and they conclude that they will arrive that night at 1 a.m. if they leave the restaurant now. So they are on their way, and it was a little bit of a drive. Dana was on her phone looking up the location and looking up the stories about Seven Gables Road as they're driving there. She's like, it looks like it's surrounded by farmland. There's one house on the road, and we have to cross a gate in order to get there. So we have to park the car and get out. Christina's like, that sounds perfect. It was also a full moon night, so they were really excited because she said that they thought that the full moon meant that they would experience more activity. They get there, they park the car, they cross the gate, and they're walking, and they notice that there's really no activity, even though they had looked it up and seen on ghost shows that supposedly you could see black figures crouching down this 2-track road. They didn't see anything. She said it was a crystal clear night, and all they were using was their phone lights to walk down this road. But she did say that anytime she took a photo, she would notice there would be like a weird haze over the picture, even though there were no street lights. I'm going to put 2 pictures that she sent me from this night on screen. But other than the silence, like no crickets, no frogs, there was nothing that they noticed that was out of the ordinary. So after a little while, they decided they were going to pack it up because they weren't getting any kind of activity. So they turn to head back to their car, and as they turn around, they notice there is a light in the trees, and it almost looks like a flashlight. And they're like, oh my gosh, do you think there's police out here? Because they were trespassing and they knew they shouldn't be out there. But the light wasn't moving. It wasn't bouncing like someone was walking toward them, but they just decided like, we need to get out of here now. So they start running back to the car. And as they're running, the light goes higher in the sky, and it's almost shining over them as if it were a street light, but there were no street lights in the area. When they reached their car, the light disappeared from the sky completely, and they were both completely confused. They were like, that doesn't make any sense, but there's nothing really that they can make from it. They pack it up and drive home. About 2 weeks go by, and Dana reaches out to Christina, and she's like, I really needed that. Thank you so much for taking me out there. Like, we need to do another girls' night soon. And pretty soon they settle on having dinner and drinks again. And they decided to go back to Seven Gables Road, and this time they were prepared. Christina said that she brought her Bible, and Dana brought what she described as charged crystals and sage to cleanse the path as they walked. This was supposedly, according to Dana, for good vibes and protection. And Christina says that she should have known better, but she allowed Dana to smudge both of them. Parked on one side of the gate, got out, and started walking down the 2-track road with the sage burning. And Christina says that this night seemed darker than the first night, but maybe it was just because this night wasn't a full moon anymore. But as they're walking down the road, they hear what sounds like someone knocking on a wooden door, but it was just surrounded by farmland and forest. There weren't any wooden doors around, but it sounded like it was coming from all around them. And as they're hearing this knocking, Dana turns and looks at Christina, and she says, what did you say? And Christina's like, I didn't say anything. Why? And Dana's like, I just heard your voice and you were calling me. And Christina's like, no, I didn't call you. So they're both confused, and they continue walking. And then Dana looks at her again, and she says, do you hear that knocking? And she says, well, I did, but it stopped. And Dana says, well, I hear it now. Christina says, what else do you hear? And she says, nothing, I don't want to talk about it. I think we should pack it up and go. I'm getting really creeped out. And Christina agrees. So they turn back, and they're heading back to the car when all of a sudden, out of the corner of her eye, she says she saw what she describes as a black figure crouched down on the side of the road. She decided not to give it any attention and decided that it was all just in her mind and that her mind must be playing tricks on her. So she doesn't say anything about it to Dana, and she continues walking. But then Dana says, hey, who is that crouched down on the side of the road over there? And at that point, Christina said she lost it. She booked it. She started running. She was like, oh my God, I was pretending not to see it. Both freak out. They're yelling. They're like, who's there? And as they're yelling at it, this thing stretches up and seems to cross in front of them in the road. So at this point, Christina pulls out her phone. She shines the light, and this thing disappears behind the light. Christina says they were so scared that she immediately started calling her own boyfriend. Dana had actually peed herself, but they crossed the red gate, made it back to the car. Christina immediately grabbed her Bible. Dana was on the phone with her boyfriend telling him what that just happened, and they just decided that they were going to drive to a close parking lot and park just so that they could go over what just happened. We're both just horrified and shaking, and they're talking about it, and Christina's like, what did you hear that you didn't want to talk about? And Dana's like, I don't really want to talk about it. And Christina pushes, and Dana's like, well, I think it was just a whisper. They get home and nothing else creepy happens that night. But this is the part of the story that gets sad. Remember, I warned you. So this is your chance to turn it off if you don't want to hear about the tragedy at the end. You can know about 7 Gables Road without knowing the rest of this story. That would be completely fine, or skip forward if you'd like. But 2 weeks later, Dana gets home from work and she finds that her boyfriend has himself on her kids' playset out back, and apparently this completely broke Dana. She blamed Christina and herself for going to 7 Gables Road because she directly believed that what she heard there was responsible for his death. Christina said that even though she wasn't close to Dana's boyfriend after this happened, she felt terrible, and she felt his presence around her too for weeks following his death. And one night she even had a dream where he came to visit her, and she said, why did you do this to Dana? And he said, just tell her I'm sorry. Christina says she struggled with this for a few days, but eventually decided that she had to tell Dana what he said in her dream. And so she told her, and they both cried. And then Dana revealed that their older son sometimes would point to a certain toy in his room and say, Daddy, and then that toy would light up. Christina said she was sharing this as a way to cope with what happened, and she wants to know if people think that they are actually responsible for what happened. She says that he did not have any substances in his body when they did the autopsy, and it was otherwise unexpected and not something that they thought that he would be able to do, especially being the father of a new baby as well. I will say, I don't usually offer my own opinion. I will say that I don't ever think that anyone else is responsible when it comes to someone passing by their own hand. And so if I can offer her any comfort, I don't think that it was their fault at all. Maybe you guys are able to offer her some comfort too. She says she has had dreams about 7 Gables Road since leaving multiple times, in which the road seems to be calling her back, which she is not willing to indulge. She says, I will never forget that black figure that we saw and forget being chased by it. And I know that it was something demonic. Christina, know if you have thoughts. She said it was fine if I used her real name, but Dana's name has been changed just to respect her family's privacy. Gentle with this one, y'all. If you don't have anything nice to say, you don't have to say anything.
One of my followers, her name is Bree, sent this story in to me, and oh my goodness, the way that this entity harassed her and her mother is freaking terrifying. Bree says that paranormal activity has gone on in her family for decades. She says she remembers hearing about other people's experiences in the family, but nothing like that had ever happened to her until she moved in to the current house she lives in. Bree's family has owned this property now since 2017. She says her mom and dad have been slowly building it up over the years. She says that eventually the house was finished by the time that she was a freshman in high school. And everything was normal up until sophomore year. But it was fall break, and one night she was staying up till about 11:30 when she got oddly tired, so she decided she was going to go to bed. She randomly woke up around 1:30 a.m., which for her was really weird because usually she's a very deep sleeper and not much gets her up in the middle of the night. So she was thirsty and decided she's going to make her way to the fridge to get a drink of water. Okay, as she was about to close the refrigerator, she caught something out of the corner of her eye. Her heart sank because in a reflection, she saw a woman walking down the hallway in a nightgown. So in a panic, she kind of looks over to get a better view, but by now, this thing already had disappeared into thin air. Side note, Bree says that she knew that this was not her mother because her mother would always wear pajama pants and a t-shirt to bed. So she gathers up the courage to run back to her bedroom. She closes the door as fast but as quietly as possible, and she laid down and tried to go back to sleep. So the next morning, she does ask her dad, hey, did mom get up and leave the bed in the middle of the night? And he says no. And then she asked her mother,
just to make sure, hey mom, did you get up and leave your room at all last night? And she says, no, I was in bed the whole time. Bree said she didn't end up actually telling them what she saw and kind of played it up as, oh, I just thought I heard somebody, because she didn't want them thinking she was crazy or something. So a few days later, she says to her surprise, she now wakes up at 3 a.m. exactly. And she said, that's not a very good time to be getting up. If you know, you know. But she really has to use the bathroom, and she is absolutely terrified to leave her room in the middle of the night, but she's got to go. So she finally gains the courage to run down the hallway to the bathroom and close the door behind her. And once she gets inside, she has kind of a sigh of relief. So after she does her business, she's getting up, and she says she hears the sound of footsteps creaking outside of the bathroom door. And then she hears the sound of something hitting against the door from the other side. And guys, she said she was absolutely petrified as she watched the door, and the doorknob slowly started to turn. Oh, this is like a nightmare. She says she's never moved so fast in her life. She dove over and locked the bathroom door before whatever it was could open it. Thankfully, she locked it in time, but whatever it was on the other side of that door was trying to get in. After a little while, she's like, Dad? Mom? And then pretty much right after that, whatever it was stopped. But there was no response from mom or dad. No noise, nothing. She's sitting there listening for what feels like forever. And then after a while, she starts to hear those footsteps again creaking away from the bathroom door. She wants to make note that she's a very observant person, and she knows that the sounds of those footsteps were not anybody from her family. So luckily, she has her phone with her, and she starts calling her dad repeatedly, and eventually he does wake up and answer. And at first, he is not happy about being woken up in the middle of the night, but when he hears the fear in her voice, his tone immediately changed. So she explained what happened, asked him if he could check around to see if there's anybody else in the house. And he does look all around, and there is nothing there. She says she was in shock, she was terrified, but she is really glad that there wasn't actually a real person on the outside of the door, because that could have been much worse. And then she says, if you think the horror ends there, unfortunately, it does not. So the next day, her dad leaves and goes out of town. So that night, it was going to just be her and her mother. And of course, she wakes up again in the middle of the night, and this time it's about 2:50 a.m. and she hears a noise. She says she could hear that it was coming from the front of the house, and it was repetitive banging on the front door. So the knocking just continues. So she locks herself in her room and texts her mother. And when her mother doesn't answer, she goes on her phone and checks the camera feeds from the front. And guys, nothing is there. And she goes, eventually the banging does stop. But at this point, she is a nervous wreck and is tired of having this thing constantly trying to freak her out and scare her. So she tries to go back to sleep. And just as she is dozing off, she hears a thud to the left of her. And she says her heart drops when she realizes the banging is now coming from her bedroom window. I would have lost it. She said because it was so dark outside and her lamp being on in the room, that whatever was outside of the bedroom window could definitely see through the cracks of the blinds. So she jumps out of bed, runs into her closet, and locks herself inside. And she keeps calling her mom from her cell phone, and she is hysterical at this point. All she could think to do was just yell out, "In the name of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, I rebuke you and command you to stop." And with that, the banging stopped. She said she was so relieved, and eventually her mom called her back and asked what was wrong, and she explained everything and what she heard. Her mom did believe her, but did say, "I heard nothing." And then after that, her mom told her she needs to try to go back to sleep. And so she does. And then she says fast forward to her senior year in high school. And at that point, nothing like that had ever happened to her since. But now her mother is beginning to. One night her mother was going into the garage to do some laundry. And she wants to set the scene by explaining that there is a staircase that kind of goes above the washing machine heading up into the attic. And as she's doing the laundry, she hears very heavy footsteps coming down the stairs from above. It was completely dark in the garage, and her mother just ran inside the house and slammed the door behind her. Bree says that when her mom came into the house, the look of terror on her face does not lie, and she said that it sounded like a big man coming down those stairs. Bree says her heart sank because she had also heard the sounds of the steps coming down the stairs, but she assumed it was her mother going into the attic for some reason. So Bree's dad grabs his GUN and runs out into the garage to look. Nothing was there, and they said that the only way that you could have locked the door was from inside. So if something would have exited, they would not have been able to lock it. But the locks were not touched. Bree's mom still has no idea what the heck that was walking down those steps, but Bree suspects that whatever it was likely the same thing that was harassing her. It's just one of those stories that makes you be like, I would have been out of there, but think about all that work that the family put into that home. It's kind of hard to go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in that situation? And if you have a creepy story of your own, you gotta share it with me. And if you're new here, definitely follow for more creepy story time.
Do you believe that humans can be possessed? What about pets? Spooky story time. Tiffany sent me this story, and she says that when she was about 16 years old, her mom, her dad, and her dog Shiloh moved to Michigan. She said that Shiloh was about 4 years old, and he was the most sweetest, loving dog, but he wouldn't listen. She tried teaching him how to roll and how to sit and how to do all of the fun stuff, and he just wouldn't do it. She says that immediately after they moved into this house, he became very clingy towards her. If she moved, he followed. If she went to the restroom and closed the door, he was sitting right out that door crying or even scratching at the door. About 6 months into this move, he actually started to act the complete opposite way. He did not want anything to do with her. He would growl at her. If she sat down anywhere near him, he would get up and leave. And she had no idea what was going on, but she just thought maybe he's just going through a phase and he'll get over it. One day her mom and her dad decide to go on a date, and she stays home alone. She's sitting down on the couch, she is watching TV, and Shiloh approaches her and sits at her feet. Obviously she was excited, she was happy because he had not wanted to be anywhere near her, and now here he was, so she calls him on the couch and he listens. She's hugging him and cuddling him and playing with him. She grabs his little face and she looks at him, and immediately she notices something's off. The eyes that she was looking into were not Shiloh's. She says that those eyes were completely different. So she says that immediately she gets up and she looks at him and she does this. Kind of like roll over, and he does. She tells him to sit, and he does, and immediately she knew that that was not Shiloh. She's freaking out, so she runs into her room, she slams the door, and as she's doing that, she hears human feet, like a regular person, chasing after her down the hallway. Then she hears Shiloh's paws kind of like clawing at the door, but she knows that she heard like an actual person running. It didn't sound like the dog was chasing her. Immediately she calls mom and dad, and mom's like, okay, what's going on? Call the police. We're on our way. What if someone got into the house? So she does. The police come and she opens the door for them. She explains the situation and they're like, okay, everybody calm down. Let's make sure that Shiloh's okay. She looks inside the house. She's searching everywhere and he's nowhere to be found. Her parents get there. They tear that house up. He's gone. Tiffany is 23 years old now, and she says that she never saw Shiloh again. She didn't know how, if he was even able to get out, how it was even possible. But the only thing that she knows is that whoever was looking at her was not Shiloh's eyes. That was not Shiloh at all. And if it wasn't Shiloh, then what was it? Let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much to Tiffany for sending me this spooky story. I'm pretty sure this is the very first pet story that I have told, and it was pretty freaky. If you guys have any stories that you'd like for me to read, please send them via DM or email, because I'd love to read them, and I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
My family lived in Warsaw, right next to a large cemetery, in a house once owned by a successful Polish actor. The house was 3 stories high, plus a loft and a large basement with a sauna and vast, poorly lit hallway. To enter, you had to open a heavy iron door that shut on its own, sealing you in and muffling any sound from the rest of the house. I believe my brother was the first to mention the unexplainable sobbing he heard when he was supposed to be the only one in the house. Something similar happened to me when I was too sick to go to school. I was watching TV on the second floor, and I started to process a distant noise. I switched it to mute and focused. I could barely hear some old 30s or 40s Polish blues song with a good amount of static. I got up, and I followed the noise down a floor. Then I paused, halfway down the staircase, and I looked at the heavy iron door. Something didn't feel right, and there was an odour, a metallic, dry smell. The music was still playing somewhere deep behind the door. I got ready to bolt up the stairs into the well-lit ground floor, but something, curiosity maybe, made me slow my breathing, calm my nerves, and proceed down the remaining stairs. The door slowly creaked open, shining a square patch of light on the tile that disappeared as the light flickered on. The song was still very distant, but I noticed it was coming from the storage area at the very end of the narrow hallway around the corner. Now this got my heart racing, because the only means of lighting this hallway was a switch in the room across it. But the dread I felt at this moment was overwhelmed with the need to find the source of that haunting music. Slowly, I made my way around the corner and stared into the darkness, trying to adjust my eyes, and I could finally make out a phrase in the song. Spaczna zawsze moje dziecko. It was a woman singing with a desperate grief in her voice, but it was beautiful. I took a step. The music grew louder, then another, and the woman's voice grew sadder. Spaczna zawsze moje dziecko, nie patrz wstecz. I was in the room, my heart beating up my chest, feeling frantically for the switch. I finally find it, but despair gets the better of me when I press the switch with no reaction. The dry metallic stench is stronger than ever. Don't breathe. Don't let it hear you. I stand there, unable to move, despite the intense urge to run. I recall all of the gravestones I saw on Easter at the cemetery, and I remember a child was buried next to his mother. Spaczna zawsze moje dziecko. Sleep, my child, forever. I felt something on the back of my neck. Something cold. Nie patrz wstecz. Don't look back. And it sobbed from behind me, and the heavy iron door creaked shut. Nie patrz wstecz.
This is the story of Himura Mansion, and if you've never heard of it, I'll give you the setup. In 2001, a survival horror game called Zero was released in Japan, and then it was renamed Fatal Frame for its release in North America in 2002. And printed right on the cover were the words, "based on a true story." And those 5 words changed everything, because suddenly this wasn't just a haunted house story. It was treated as truth, as if it were evidence, and people began to believe there was really a mansion in Japan, hidden away somewhere in the mountains, where a family performed ritual sacrifices to keep something dark, something terrifying sealed away. And for years, no one could quite agree on whether or not that place actually existed. So tonight, we're going to walk through the legend surrounding Himura Mansion, the ritual, the family, the deaths, and at the center of it all, the sacrificial lamb. According to the lore in Fatal Frame, Himura Mansion was in this incredibly isolated location, surrounded by forests so dense that very little light reached the ground. The kind of place where a dense fog settled and didn't lift for days, where even during the day you couldn't see clearly. For generations, the Himura family lived there in seclusion, not as caretakers of the land, but as caretakers of something far more dangerous. So beneath the mansion was what they called the Hellgate, a boundary between worlds, between this world and that of the dead, a weak point at which malicious, vengeful spirits could cross over. Every 50 years, that boundary would weaken even further. And when it did, the family believed only one thing could keep it sealed: a ritual. Some translations called it the strangling ritual. Others called it the rope shrine maiden ritual. Either way, it required a sacrifice. It required a sacrifice, and here's how it worked. A girl would be chosen at birth, and she was called the Rope Shrine Maiden, and she wouldn't be raised like a normal child. She wouldn't be allowed to make friends or go to school. She would have no connection to the outside world, remaining in a hidden room in that mansion. And she would be put in this small, quiet space tucked away in the roof, where she would be completely isolated. And her entire life, she would be told one thing: you were born for this. Your purpose is to protect everyone. And for years, 15, sometimes 16 years, she would be prepared, conditioned to believe that this was normal, that this was the honorable thing to do with her life. And she would be fed just enough to survive, taught prayers she wouldn't fully understand, told that her pain would be temporary, that her sacrifice would protect the family, the village, everyone.
Did this ghost photo just prove that the Knights Templar did hide the Holy Grail in the U.S.? Gloss on so I can run this mouth. Now focus. Scary story time. Fright Night Files. A creator shared this photo that she captured on her Ring camera. She said that they own land in the Appalachian Mountains, around 200 acres, but they don't live there full time. So occasionally she'll check the Ring camera and see if she gets anything. And it showed this image, which is clearly a horse with a rider. Now, it wasn't moving. It didn't move in. It didn't move out. It just flashed and it captured this kind of like a still. Now, she said that she does have a cemetery on the property, but a lot of people, me included, noticed that the rider doesn't look like a normal, like a cowboy rider or something like that. It kind of looks like it's wearing armor, or he's wearing armor. It looks like a knight. It really looks like what the Knights Templar used to wear. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the Knights Templar, but I want to tell you a little bit of facts about them first. They were a very wealthy, powerful, devout Christian military order. They were defenders of the Christian faith in the Holy Land, also known as warrior monks because they were very strict in their beliefs of things that they had to do, very monk-like. They're known for wearing the bright red cross across their chest. But something you may not have known is they created the first banking system. So in 1307, King Philip IV of France owed the order a lot of money, and he didn't have the funds to pay them back. So he ordered the arrest of all of them. He made up some fake charges about heresy and immoral behavior. Many were executed, but some of them escaped to Scotland. Now, it's said that when they escaped, they took a lot of stuff with them, like the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, and a bunch of other super important secrets. But here's where it gets interesting, because after they escaped to Scotland, no one really knows what happened to them or the things they had with them next. There's a theory that in 1398, the Sinclair and Zeno voyage happened. Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney, sailed from Scotland to North America, and he is said to have taken some Templars with him. So a sign of the Templars is supposed to be this hooked X. It shows up on a lot of structures in North America. And then the Cherokees have this legend of the moon-eyed people. They were said to have pale skin and beards. Many believe that they're the Templars, and another thing that makes sense about it being the Templars is because they were said to have been in the Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachian Mountains are a lot like the Highlands in Scotland, so it would have made sense for them to go there because they would have been familiar with how the mountains were, the terrain, and all of that stuff. There's also the Rosling Chapel carvings in Scotland, which was built by descendants of Sinclair. It had carvings of maize and aloe vera cacti, which were unknown to Europe at the time, which is proof that Sinclair had to have came back from his voyage. If you look at the photo of the ghost,
he looks like he's wearing armor, and so does the horse.
You look at some depictions of the Knights Templar, you have to admit they look really similar. So did the Knights Templar come over here and hide all of the things that they took when they were disbanded, like the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail? Are they still patrolling and guarding? Could the Holy Grail be somewhere on that 200 acres? I don't know. What do you guys think?
I've always loved scary stories that send chills down your spine, but I never thought I would experience something like this myself. For the sake of the story, I like to go by Jay. The first time I had a paranormal encounter, I was around 8 or 9 years old. My older brother was 14 when this event happened, and it's something I could never forget. It started one night when my brother and I decided to stay up late since it wasn't a school night. We loved competing in friendly challenges to see who could stay up the longest. At the time, my mom used to read us the Bible to strengthen our faith. But being kids, we never really took it seriously because we didn't understand. Eventually, our little competition ended, and we both headed to bed. Around 3 in the morning, I heard noises, like someone walking around. I heard my brother muttering and decided to check why he was still up. I peeked out of my room and saw him sleepwalking for the first time in a long time. But the way he was walking was too precise, as if he was following someone or something. I decided to follow him back to his room. At the time, my brother had a futon that was slightly broken because we were always roughhousing and play fighting, so some small metal bars were sticking out. As I walked behind him, watching him follow whatever it was, he suddenly tripped over nothing. By the grace of God, I caught him before he fell face first into the metal bars. The next day, I asked him about it. My mom and I laughed at how silly he was for sleepwalking, but the laughter faded when he told us he saw a woman in an all-black dress with her face covered by a veil. She was asking him to follow her. He didn't realize he was actually sleepwalking in real life while following her in his dream. My mom, being very religious, made my brother recite a passage from the Bible and anointed him with holy oil. A few weeks later, it was a quiet night. Everyone, including me, was asleep when I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. I remember dreaming about her too, but this time I saw her face.
Welcome back to another spooky, scary story. So my brother was living with me. He swore that he heard me calling his name. The thing is, I wasn't home. I was out running some errands. So I guess he was taking a shower and he heard me yell at him, right? And me and him, we joke around a lot. So he thought I was just playing a game, right? Of calling his name and not answering. So I guess he heard it, and when he called me, he didn't hear anything. But then it wasn't just name calling. He heard somebody knocking on the door. So he thought it was me or one of the kids that had got back from the store and were trying to use the bathroom. So he called out, I guess, like, hey, what? I'm using the bathroom. No answer. So he hears it for a third time. And this time he said, I quickly got the hell out of the bathroom. He called me. He doesn't even go look for me. And he's frantically like telling me like what's happening, right? So he's just like telling me, hurry back home. I'm a little scared, blah, blah. He's a grown man and he was scared. But when it started happening to my nephew, like we all started getting freaked out. So at first he heard a knocking and he thought it was one of us playing a joke on him. So he answered, he didn't get an answer back and ignored it. Then he said it was 2 more times and this time it was pretty hard, like they were trying to make themselves known. So he said he opened the door a little bit and called out for us, but there was nobody. So he calls me on my phone and he's like, you need to get home now. So I remember rushing home and then he's telling me in detail everything. And he's like, this thing is getting like aggressive, like it's banging. It's not knocking, it's like banging on the doors now. So then we get like holy water and we kind of pray and things calm down. But then there's one night where he's playing games in the middle of the night, right? And I'm already asleep. And this guy comes running into my room, frantic, terrified. I'm like, what's wrong? He's like, tell me this whole story about how he's playing games. And I guess he's cussing up a storm, right? And he sees a drawer, the kitchen drawer, open and a fork literally goes flying toward him. And my son is right next to him. And my son's like, yep, mom. I seen it with my own eyes. I seen this drawer open and the fork got thrown at him. And I was so tired. I remember just telling him, well, that's what you get. Like, why are you cussing up a storm in the middle of the night? And for the longest time, I remember they didn't want to stay up because they were scared of that whole incident. And for all those people that are like, oh, you need Jesus in your life. Like, I do pray. I am religious. I just can't help that those things happen in my house. I just go on here and share them with you guys because I know a lot of you can relate or you like listening to my spooky, scary stories. And if you do, thank you so much. And I will have more stories coming soon.
Let's read some more Glitch in the Matrix stories. We have a breakfast laid on at work every morning. Just a simple buffet of eggs, bacon, what have you. Nothing huge, and it's really only to feed about a dozen people or so. I am usually one of the first guys from my team to get to work, and the kitchen was deserted as usual. I walked into the little kitchen. There was a ceramic egg tray thing with 12 eggs in it, like the bottom half of an egg carton with a socket for each egg. All spaces were filled with warm, freshly boiled eggs. I take one, walk over to the garbage bin, shuck the shell, then I walk back over to the food and stop dead. There are 12 eggs in the tray again. No one entered the room while I was peeling the thing. I touched the mystery egg, and it was the same temp as the other eggs around it. Not a big thing, nothing major, but something very strange. Given one does not get presented with strange eggs from a parallel universe every day, I ate it. I would probably eat it too. At 12 years of age, my mom let me stay in the truck as she went grocery shopping. As I wait, I see an old guy walking towards the truck with an indescribable look towards me, as if I knew too much. He stops 5 feet from the truck, looks at me for a couple seconds, and heads back the exact way he came. It was rather traumatic for some reason, and very confusing at that age. 5 to 6 years later, my dad was showing me home videos of us at Yellowstone. At Old Faithful, I noticed that same guy, same look, same clothes, peering at us on camera, and at me through the TV. I'm freaked out just telling this. What on earth? Staring at you through the TV? That is not a human. My dad had this little toy monkey that he used to call his favorite child and tease me and my siblings with it. Not in a bad way, but it was really frustrating to us, and we spent hours trying to steal it from him. Well, anyways, one day we finally got it and threw it into the garbage after drawing on it and mangling it for a little bit. My dad laughed and searched for it for a bit, but basically figured we had thrown it out and gave up after a week or so. Anyways, a few years later, when I was about 17, I'm walking down the street in Toronto. I don't live in Toronto, was just visiting friends, and I see this little orange object on the side of the road. When I walk over to it, I pick it up and see that it is the exact same monkey. It even had the black Sharpie lines on it from when we drew all over it. I honestly cannot even come up with the chances of that happening, especially considering our garbage is sent to a local dump and is nowhere near Toronto. I used to work in a building that had 3 levels of sub-basements, with the piece of lab equipment I typically worked on in the lowest basement. I had the only key. There was a weird phone in there, and I did work late some nights, but not this night. I was sleeping alone in my apartment when I woke up to a call on my cell phone from my girlfriend at 3 a.m. She was in hysterics and asking why I scared her. Apparently, she received a call from that basement phone just a minute earlier, with someone who sounded like me, slowly repeating her name until crackling and fading out. My apartment was 10 miles away from work. I thought she was lying, but I saw the 3 a.m. call from the basement phone logged on her cell myself. Still freaks me the fuck out. My friend used to put up a reoccurring away message back in the day when everybody had AIM. She was a Beatles superfan and put up a sentiment from John and Yoko, Acorns for Peace. Well, one day, I was walking around my college campus thinking about it, but failing to remember the full quote. In my mind, I kept thinking, something for peace, what the hell is that away message? Right then, some chick on a cell phone walks by me and screams out, Acorns! I realize this is not super freaky, but it made my day at the time. It's not every day someone screams out acorns in your vicinity at the exact right time. Maybe it was the spirits of the Beatles helping you out. Let us know in the comments if you have ever experienced a glitch in the Matrix.
This right here is one of the scariest videos that I've ever seen. I don't know who recorded this or when was it recorded, but I'm sure as hell that anyone would piss his pants if this happened to him. We'll start with a guy who lives alone in this specific house right here, and he was coming back to his house after a long day of work. Now, the moment he approached his house, he started hearing noises that he normally does not hear. So the first thing that he did was grabbing his phone, and then he started recording everything to prove that it's not fake. When he started recording, he decided to go to the right side of the house next to the windows so he can hear the sound clearly. After making sure that he was not hallucinating and there's really a noise that he heard when he was next to the windows, he decided to head to the main door. This is where he decided to grab his keys and then open the door. The man was like, okay, that's probably some animal or, a rat. I'll just scare him off and then he will go away. So he opened the door and surprise, it was not what he expected. This was the first thing that he saw in front of him when he opened the door. So the guy panicked. He didn't know what to do. So he was like, oh yeah, we're closing that door. Closed the door because he panicked in an instant, but then he decided to open it again just to make sure. And when he barely opened it again, something was thrown in this direction and you can actually see it. After seeing this, the guy was like, yeah, I'm 100% sure. Oh, no, we're not staying here for the moment. So he decided to head to his friend's house. He stayed in his friend's house for a while, but then he was like, bro, what's the point of me staying in my friend's house? Things cannot stay like this. I should go back to my house and check by myself. I mean, it's my house after all. So he made it back to his house and immediately went sleeping because he was tired of all the thinking. But just before sleeping, he made sure to record everything. After a while, the guy woke up because he didn't feel right. You know, even when he was sleeping, something did not feel right. So he immediately went to his phone, he grabbed it, and decided to check what he recorded. And this is where he realized that he was cooked. Bro, what the hell is even that? I did not even see it at first, so I don't blame you if you don't see anything. You really have to focus, and then you will see a big shadow around him. Bro, what is this? Bro, I'm not gonna lie, I hope he changed the whole damn house, because whatever is this, it doesn't seem nice.
A lot of people believe in something called the Dogman. Now, the Dogman was first seen in Michigan, and this is sort of a hotspot for sightings. The Dogman is a dog-like version of Bigfoot. Now, there was a story out of northern Michigan. There was this boy who said that him, his brother, and his father, every couple weeks, they would go out to this property that his father owned, and they would gather firewood. And he said his dad had this big trailer that they would fill all the way to the top. And when it was full, they would leave. Well, this particular night, him and his brother and his father, they go to this spot in the middle of their property, and they start chopping wood. And it started to get dark, but by this time they had only filled up half the trailer. But he said his father started to get really nervous. And all of a sudden he tells him and his brother, I want you to get in the car immediately. Don't look back. Don't say anything. Get in the car, lock the doors, and be quiet. And so he started, to kind of pick up his axe and pick up some of the tools. And his dad's like, no, just leave them. Take your brother, run to the front of the car, get inside and lock the door. So he just grabs his brother and they started running to the front of this truck. As they're running, he said he kind of glanced over and he could see shadows of something moving through the woods, kind of following them. So him and his brother, they jump in the truck. He locks the doors and he said, there was just this really bad feeling in the air, like something was going to happen. And he said all of a sudden they hear boom, 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 boom. His dad is banging on the window. Let me in the truck. So his dad jumps in the truck and he starts the car or the truck up and they take off. And his dad is just speeding and this trailer is thrashing back and forth, almost getting ready to fall off. And his father doesn't care. And he said, it was strange because normally they wouldn't leave till that trailer was full. And he said, as his father's driving, up this bumpy dirt road, all of a sudden, this crashing sound, like something hits the front of the vehicle. And his father slams on the brakes. And as they look on the hood of this truck, there is a rotten carcass sitting there. Something threw this rotten deer carcass at the front of this vehicle. And he said that's when they heard this loud roar. And as they looked over, they seen what looked like a dog standing on two legs. And so his dad hit the gas and he starts speeding off out of there. And this thing begins to chase them. And it was keeping pace with the vehicle for some time. He said eventually it broke off and it went into the woods, and his father just kept on driving. And they kept asking his father, what was that? What happened? And his father said, just be quiet, like you don't need to know. Let's not talk about it. And his father never told him what he had seen that night.
On the afternoon of June 29th, 2018, a 44-year-old woman named Dawn Sturgis sat on a blanket in a park in Salisbury, England, drinking some wine with a few friends and her boyfriend Charlie Rowley. It was Dawn's favorite way to spend a Friday, especially since it involved Charlie. So they'd been dating for 16 months, and she was completely in love with him, primarily because Charlie was truly like the lone bright spot in Dawn's otherwise really difficult life. So Dawn was an alcoholic who had struggled with an undiagnosed case of bipolar disorder for years. And so she had a hard time finding work. And for the last 2 years, she had actually lived in a therapeutic group home. But it was a little after she had moved in there that she had very fortunately met Charlie. Now, on paper, Dawn and Charlie did not seem like they would be good for each other. Charlie was addicted to heroin. He also didn't have a job, and he was frequently in trouble with the law. And so when they first got together, people in Dawn's life worried that Charlie ultimately was just going to pull her down even further into her own problems. But they did make each other really happy, and so they spent basically all of their time together, going between each other's apartments and visiting the park and hanging out with their friends. And for Dawn, this taste of happiness had made her want to make some positive changes in her life. Now, she still drank alcohol, but she finally got her bipolar disorder diagnosed and properly medicated. And she was feeling stable for the first time in years. She was even planning to move out of that group home and into a new apartment soon, and hoped that, that would give her a chance for a true fresh start. And because of all these changes, Dawn had planned a get-together with her family to show them how well she was doing. It was in a few days, and she'd really wanted Charlie to come with her, since their relationship, at least in her mind, was a huge reason she'd been so motivated to turn this corner. Except, despite how much she adored Charlie and really was excited for her life with him, at the current moment as they sat in the park on this Friday, she actually was really mad at him. So before arriving at the park, Charlie and their friends had done some heroin and some other drugs, and being under the influence of these substances was making Charlie act like a total jerk. Dawn had just bought some new hair dye to give herself a new look for this get-together with her family, and now Charlie, high on drugs, was wasting it by putting it in his beard and his eyebrows as a joke. And so Dawn ultimately was really mad, not so much because he was wasting the dye, but because by dyeing your beard and eyebrows and all that Charlie was going to look like a total deranged mess when he met her family for the first time in a few days. And so when she expressed her concerns to Charlie, he did go and, wash out the dye from his face, and he got most of it out. But even after, Dawn still felt just so annoyed by the whole thing. It's like he knew how important this meeting with her family was going to be. Why would you jeopardize that? And so in the end, even after he had cleaned himself up, Dawn just got up and stormed off, leaving Charlie and the friends to pack everything up. She was done. Hours later, around 10 p.m. that night, Dawn lay on the couch in Charlie's living room, listening to Charlie and their friend Sam Hobson talk about life and how unpredictable and how unfair it could be. Now, Dawn was still feeling annoyed at Charlie, but overall, she was mostly back to being in a pretty good mood. After she had stormed away from the park, she'd gone to her place, and she had dyed her hair with the rest of the dye that was left, and then she'd called her mom. Dawn actually had 3 kids of her own, and 2 of them were adults. But her own mother, so Dawn's mother, had custody of the youngest child, and Dawn was hoping that maybe they could all see each other tomorrow at this get-together. And her mother had said yes, so Dawn was really looking forward to that. But at this exact moment, all Dawn really wanted to do was just go to sleep. So she got up off the couch to go grab her nightly medication out of the bathroom, and just to get there, she had to carefully step around all the junk and just sort of random items that were laying strewn about all over Charlie's apartment. Charlie was always going out and finding things out on the street or even in dumpsters and bringing those things back home. Sometimes he would sell these things afterwards, but a lot of the things he just sort of kept around. So the apartment was very cluttered. But Dawn successfully navigated the pathway to the bathroom. She grabbed her pills and then went back to the couch, swallowed the medication, and then she lay back into the cushions. Then minutes later, she was asleep. The next morning, Dawn woke up on Charlie's couch a little bit before 9:30 a.m. She did have a small hangover, just a little headache, but by her standards, that was not so bad. She had not drank a ton the day before, so this was a good start to her day. Just a few minutes later, Charlie came into the room and he sat on the couch next to her and said good morning. And between Dawn not feeling that great physically and remembering how obnoxious Charlie had been yesterday with the hair dye, Dawn really didn't feel like talking to him right now. But before she could say as much, Charlie's eyes lit up and he said he'd almost forgotten. He actually had a present for her that he'd gotten a few days ago. And then Charlie, he jumped up and he disappeared into the kitchen, and then he came back with a box, which he said was for her. It was her gift. And this made Dawn forget all about her irritation with him. Dawn didn't get very many gifts. I mean, she had a lot of friends in her life who, wanted to give her gifts, but, they, much like her and Charlie, didn't have much money. And so gifts were not a common thing in her life. And so to be receiving this gift right now was really exciting. And so Dawn smiled widely and she opened up the box's lid, and inside was this clearly very expensive bottle of perfume. And she gasped when she saw it. It was brand new. She would never have been able to afford something like this, and she was shocked, frankly, that Charlie had managed to get it for her. Like, how could he have gotten this? Dawn gave Charlie a very excited hug, and she told him she absolutely loved it. And so she pulled it out and she sprayed some on her wrists and she rubbed them together and she thought it smelled so good. And then she handed the bottle to Charlie and told him to please put this somewhere safe. Then she stood up from the couch with a big smile on her face and she went to get her makeup to go get ready for the day. About 5 minutes later, Dawn was sitting back on the couch with her makeup bag now in her lap, and she was applying foundation to her face and telling Charlie about how she was thinking about putting more dye in her hair, maybe a blue streak this time. But as she finished her foundation and reached for her powder, she felt her headache suddenly intensify. She winced, hoping it would pass, but pretty soon she started feeling pretty lightheaded and realized she was sweating quite a bit. She stopped talking about her hair and told Charlie she was feeling really weird. Charlie seemed worried and asked if she wanted some pain relievers, but Dawn just shook her head. She'd already taken her meds that day and didn't want to take more pills because it could upset her stomach. Instead, she handed her makeup bag to Charlie and asked him to go put it back in the bedroom, and then she hurried to the bathroom to splash some water on her face. And by the time she got in there and actually began putting the water on her face, it was like her whole body felt like it was on fire. She was sweating so much to the point where she felt like this water wasn't enough. And so she actually just climbed into the empty bathtub and just figured the cold tile of the tub would feel good against her hot skin. But as soon as she climbed in and laid down, she felt her breath start to catch in her chest. From the living room, Charlie heard Dawn in the bathroom, and he heard the sound of the water turning on and then off, and then the sound of Dawn rustling around in there. Now, he was somewhat worried about her, but he also knew she regularly had hangovers, and she clearly had one now, and so he figured, that's what this was. He also really wanted to leave right now and go meet up with his friend Sam to shoot up some more heroin, because that would take the edge off his headache and his nausea. However, before he could do that, he heard a weird sound coming out of the bathroom where Dawn was. At first, he wasn't even sure what it was, but then he realized it was a gurgling sound. And so at this point, he jumped to his feet and he hurried to the bathroom door, and as soon as he opened it, he gasped, because Dawn was laying there in the empty bathtub, fully clothed, and frothing at the mouth. Charlie had no idea what was happening, but he instinctively ran over to her, pulled her out of the tub, and he laid her on the floor, and he could tell that she was basically unconscious and she was limp, and in fact, when he listened closely to her mouth, he couldn't even tell if she was breathing. And so Charlie's thinking, this is not a hangover, this is something way more serious. So he ran and got a phone and he called the emergency line. And when the dispatcher picked up, Charlie frantically explained what was going on, that, Dawn, his girlfriend, had just collapsed in the bathtub out of nowhere. The operator got his address and said they would send a paramedic, but they also told Charlie he would have to do CPR on Dawn while he waited, and so they explained to him how to do that over the phone. Charlie was horrified, but he tried to take a deep breath and do what they said so he could help Dawn, so he kept the phone by his side while he straddled Dawn and gave her chest compressions. It would take an agonizing 19 minutes before a single paramedic finally arrived. And by that time, Dawn had begun to turn blue. Charlie paced around anxiously inside of his apartment, while the paramedic took over chest compressions. Charlie could hear the paramedic calling for more help on his radio. And sure enough, a few minutes later, more paramedics streamed inside. And at first, this made Charlie feel hopeful, like more medical support meant that Dawn was going to be okay here. But then, from his spot out in the living room, he heard one of the paramedics say something about drugs, like this could be an overdose or something. Charlie heard that and he called out that Dawn didn't do drugs, but the paramedics did not seem to hear him. And a second later, their voices got more urgent. They were using a lot of medical terminology that Charlie didn't understand, but he did catch one thing. Dawn's heart had apparently stopped. Now, the paramedics were actually able to get her heart beating again, but it took them more than an hour to get her stable enough to move her from Charlie's apartment to the hospital. And Charlie, he just watched in panic and despair as they loaded his girlfriend on a stretcher, and then he followed them out of the apartment to stay with Dawn for as long as he could. And then before they put her into the ambulance, he leaned in and he told her he would meet her at the hospital. As the ambulance doors closed and the sirens came on, Charlie's friend, Sam, appeared, looking very shocked by the commotion. They'd had plans to go to a church event that day that had free food, which Charlie had totally forgotten about. But Charlie told Sam everything that had happened and said he had to skip out on that event because he needed to go to the hospital as fast as he could to meet Dawn. But even as he was saying this out loud, he knew he really couldn't do that. Because if he went to the hospital right now, he had no idea how long he'd be there. And since he was addicted to heroin, he would start to get sick from withdrawal if he didn't get some drugs in his system first. And so Charlie felt trapped. He really didn't know what to do here, and he sort of felt like he was on the verge of breaking down. This was just so much. But then he remembered he had a methadone prescription at the local pharmacy. Methadone is a drug that's often given to people who are addicted to heroin, who are, trying to get clean, and this drug is used to help them with addiction and withdrawal symptoms. It sort of closely mimics what the body would feel if it shot up the drug, but without, the euphoria and the actual high sensation of using the drug. Now, Charlie had not actually filled his methadone prescription yet, mostly because he was not focused on getting clean. But as he's thinking about needing to be at the hospital all day and needing to be, coherent and being able to talk to doctors and nurses and Dawn, he thought, well, hey, I'll go fill my methadone prescription. I'll take that. It'll keep me, from getting sick, but I'll also be clear-minded so I can be in the hospital and help Dawn. So Charlie asked Sam if he would come with him on a different outing to go to the pharmacy to get his methadone. A couple of hours later, at around 3:30 p.m., Charlie got back to his apartment with Sam. It had been incredibly hot outside, and walking around for that long, they now were both dripping with sweat. After they had gone to the pharmacy, Charlie and Sam had actually gone by that church event, but not really to get food, but instead to literally go say a prayer for Dawn. Now, they were back at his place to pack up a bag both for himself and also for Dawn that they would bring to her at the hospital, and then Charlie didn't really know how long he would be there, but he now had his methadone and figured he'd be okay. But as Charlie was doing this, it was like he couldn't think straight. He had this really intense headache, and even though it had been hot outside, it was like he just couldn't stop sweating. And so Charlie was thinking to himself, maybe it's the methadone. He had never done it before, and maybe this is like a byproduct. Maybe these are symptoms from taking methadone. So he decided he would just take a shower, thinking that would kind of, clear out these symptoms and he'd be back to normal. But after the shower, he felt even worse. And when he looked in the mirror, he saw his pupils were now constricted to little pinpricks. But he still tried to press on here, and he went into his room to get dressed and to finish packing Dawn's bag. But as just a couple of minutes went by, he noticed his heart began to race. And as it raced, it got faster and faster, like he couldn't calm it down. Now, over the past couple of days, between the methadone and heroin, Charlie had basically used a lot of drugs. But he did drugs all the time. And he'd never felt this combination of symptoms before. And so Charlie, he leaves the bedroom and he goes into the living room and he just sits down on the couch feeling completely awful. And he has this thought come to him. He's thinking, okay, I don't think it's the drugs because I always do drugs and this is not it. I've never felt this way. And he looks over at Sam, his friend, and he has this weird thought that it's like, what if Sam poisoned me? What if that's what's going on here? What if I've been poisoned? And without really thinking through how or when this could have happened or why, Charlie began berating Sam, saying, "You poisoned me! Why did you do this to me?" And Sam was so caught off guard that he was like, "What are you talking about?" And he began backing away. And Charlie, he just jumped up off the couch and began to pursue Sam like he was going to attack him. But after only taking a couple of steps away from the couch, Charlie's mouth filled up with so much saliva that he stopped being able to speak clearly. All he could do was kind of gurgle and spit out this froth, and then his legs got so weak and wobbly that he had to lean against the wall just to keep from falling down. And then he felt his whole body begin to seize up, and then the last thing Charlie was aware of was his friend Sam grabbing a phone and calling for an ambulance. About an hour later, inside of the emergency room of the Salisbury District Hospital, the on-call doctor stood in Charlie Rowley's treatment room while a nurse at his bedside took his blood. The doctor had just finished examining Charlie, who was now unconscious.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
He'd clearly had a seizure, and now he had a fever. He had constricted pupils, and he had labored breathing. So clearly, to the doctor, Charlie's condition was very serious. But the doctor was sure he knew exactly what had caused it. Charlie had overdosed on drugs. And the doctor really felt strongly about this because Charlie's girlfriend, Dawn, had been treated that morning for the exact same thing. She'd been brought in after her heart stopped, and she'd had a lot of the same symptoms as Charlie. Now, they had stabilized her, but she'd been admitted to the intensive care unit and was still listed in critical condition. And so the doctor felt really confident in his diagnosis of both Dawn and Charlie because the symptoms fit. And the officer in charge of both cases had confirmed that Charlie, at least, was a known drug user, and the apartment where they'd both been found had been full of needles and other drug paraphernalia. Over the next 24 hours, neither Dawn nor Charlie got any better. In fact, they both got much worse. Their nervous systems began to completely break down, meaning that essential body functions like breathing were beginning to fail. Dawn was literally in a coma and being kept alive by a life support machine, and Charlie was also still unconscious, and his breathing had declined to the point where they had to put him on a ventilator. He'd also been moved to the intensive care unit, same as Dawn. And so at this point, Charlie and Dawn no longer looked like they had simply overdosed on drugs. It seemed like maybe they actually took a bad drug, like there was, poison in the drugs they took perhaps, or something completely different. But none of the medical staff could figure out what was actually wrong. It was totally anomalous. By the afternoon of July 3rd, so 3 days after Dawn and Charlie were hospitalized, one of the doctors in the intensive care unit where they were, his name was Stephen Jukes, he had officially taken over both of their cases. Dr. Jukes had seen the results from the initial toxicology screenings, and they showed that while Charlie did have a significant amount of heroin and other drugs in his system, Dawn did not. All her results showed was that she'd taken some prescription psychiatric medication. And so Dr. Jukes had sent more of their blood to another lab to test for a wider range of drugs. So he was waiting on those results. But admittedly, he was losing faith that the results he was going to get would give him his answer. Now, by this point, Dr. Jukes had ruled out some things that could have caused their symptoms. Like at one point, they believed that, maybe the two had been exposed to a gas leak in Charlie's apartment because some of the symptoms you get with the gas leak are similar to what they had. But the main reason this theory didn't really work out is, Dawn and Charlie had been in the apartment together that morning that Dawn was brought into the hospital, but only Dawn was affected. Charlie wasn't. And so presumably they were both being exposed at the same time to, if there was a gas leak. But then Charlie, he leaves the house for several hours, so he's out completely unexposed to whatever was in there. He comes back into the apartment, and then he feels sick. It didn't really add up. If he got sick from a gas leak in the apartment, it should have happened at the same time as Dawn. Also, the first responders, when they were in there working on Dawn, they didn't report smelling anything odd. Now, of course, some leaks like carbon monoxide, you wouldn't be able to smell that, but a typical gas leak, you would be able to smell. It smells like rotten eggs. Plus, you also have the fact that when Charlie got sick, Sam, his friend, was in the apartment as well, and he did not get sick. So, all told, the gas leak theory seemed to not be it. Dr. Jukes had also briefly wondered if maybe what had happened to Dawn and Charlie was connected to this strange toxin exposure case that had come through the hospital a couple of months earlier. However, the victims in that case were from out of the country, and Dawn and Charlie had not been out of England, so Dr. Jukes had ruled that out as well. But Dr. Jukes did have one theory he still thought was a good one. Maybe this was pesticide poisoning. It matched with their symptoms, And Dr. Jukes knew that sometimes street drugs can be contaminated with pesticides. So if Dawn and Charlie had both taken something that Dr. Jukes hadn't tested for yet, then they could have maybe been exposed that way. He had told the police about this theory, and so they'd issued a press release encouraging drug users to be extra cautious in case, there was this pesticide out there. But Dr. Jukes also knew that drugs were not the only way people could be exposed to pesticides. Simply eating, drinking, or breathing in contaminated food or water or air could be fatal. And this was extremely troubling to Dr. Jukes and everybody else involved with the case. Because if Dawn and Charlie had been exposed to potentially deadly chemicals just by doing normal things in their home or neighborhood, that meant that basically everybody else in their neighborhood was also in danger of getting sick too. Now, until Dawn or Charlie woke up again, they were not going to be able to figure out, where they had been or what they had touched or ingested before they got sick. So Dr. Jukes felt like he needed to get that information from somewhere else, and fast. The next morning, July 4th, so 4 days after Dawn and Charlie got sick, Dr. Jukes pushed open a door to a room where Dawn's mother, her 3 sisters, and her son were all waiting. He'd heard they were all here visiting Dawn, and so he had one of the nurses send them to one of these hospital family rooms so he could speak to them. He was hoping that they might be able to shed some light on where Dawn had been and what she might have eaten or drank before she got sick. Now, Dawn's family was staring at him with anxious expressions on their faces. He barely got out his introduction before they started lobbing questions at him about what was going on and why the news was describing Dawn as some kind of drug addict. Dr. Jukes just held up his hand to slow them down, and once they were quiet, he explained that at first they had believed this was an overdose because she had all the symptoms for it. But now, based on how the symptoms had progressed, he knew overdose was very likely not the case here. Then he told them his theory about the pesticides and said he really needed their help with it. He asked them to tell him everything they could about Dawn, her habits, her health history, and the people she typically saw. Dawn's mother said she had spoken to Dawn on the phone the night before all this started, and she said Dawn seemed fine. She had even asked to see her young daughter the next day at the big family get-together they were planning. Aside from that, though, the family said that, Dawn struggled with alcoholism and her mental health, and she didn't always tell them everything. And so they just didn't know much about Dawn's daily life with Charlie or her friends in Salisbury, although they were pretty sure that she rarely ever went outside of the city. But what the family primarily wanted to communicate to Dr. Jukes was that Dawn was not just some nobody the way the news had portrayed her. She was a loving mother and sister and daughter and friend, and she was really trying to do better, and she was doing better. She didn't want much. She just wanted a place of her own and a little more stability in her life, and that's the path she was on. And so they begged him not to give up on her. Dr. Jukes promised he would not. But as he left the room, he couldn't help but feel disappointed. He was glad to know more about Dawn as a person. She seemed wonderful. But he had been hoping for some kind of breakthrough about what exactly had happened to her, and he hadn't gotten that. I mean, none of them had been able to give him any answer that could maybe even begin to explain what was going on. And so at this point, he really wasn't sure what else he could even do. But as Dr. Jukes headed back towards his office to try to figure out his next move, he saw a lab tech rushing towards him down the hallway. The tech was holding a piece of paper, and when he reached Dr. Jukes, he shoved the paper into his hands. The tech was out of breath, but told Dr. Jukes he had to read this right now. So Dr. Jukes, he looked at the paper, and he saw that it was the lab results for Dawn and Charlie. And when he scanned its contents, he could not believe what he was reading. The new blood test that he had ordered did not confirm the presence of pesticides or of any other street drugs. But they did show something else. Something so unexpected and so dangerous that Dr. Jukes now knew for certain that Dawn and Charlie were not the only ones at risk here. Everyone was. Like literally everyone in Charlie's apartment building, everyone in Dawn and Charlie's neighborhood, all the paramedics, all the doctors, all the nurses that had treated them, and all the patients in the hospital. Literally everybody. In fact, it was even possible that everyone in the whole city was now in danger. And it might already be too late. And so Dr. Jukes sprinted down the hall towards his office. He picked up the phone and he called the police. A few hours later, the deputy head of investigations for one of England's counter-terrorism units, Philip Murphy, stood on the street outside of Charlie's apartment building. His team had completely cordoned off the whole building and evacuated everybody who was inside. Dozens of officers and crime scene technicians were going in and out of the space wearing these big protective suits, and they were swabbing surfaces and collecting evidence. Because of those tests that Dr. Jukes had run, Murphy knew exactly what substance had sickened Dawn and Charlie, but he had no idea how they could have come in contact with it. And answering that question was now a matter of international security. Now, not only was Murphy's counterterrorism unit involved, but so were multiple other agencies, including the UK's Secret Service, which is known as MI5. MI5 would deal with the other countries outside of Europe that were now getting involved in this. In addition to Charlie's apartment, the counterterrorism unit had been deployed to the hospital and were making anyone who visited Dawn and Charlie now wear protective gear. They had contacted all the paramedics and all the officers who'd interacted with Dawn and Charlie and made them bag up their uniforms and equipment as biohazards. Some police officers were now sifting through literally thousands of hours of CCTV footage from all around the city from the past few weeks, looking for any signs of Dawn or Charlie. And others were contacting Dawn and Charlie's friends to try to get a sense of their recent movements. At least one friend had already taken officers on a tour of a park they'd all gone to the day before Dawn and Charlie got sick. Murphy actually had a team headed there right now to close it off and start taking more samples. He also had another team at Dawn's place doing the same thing. And so, as Murphy stood there watching the officers in suits go in and out of Charlie's apartment, he knew that really, as big as this was actually just the beginning. He was going to have to be patient, because even though the situation was clearly urgent, he also knew it could take a long time to figure out exactly what happened and why. And so at this point, all Murphy, or anybody else for that matter, could do here was just hope that, the authorities found some answers before more people got hurt. But just 4 days later, on July 8th, Dawn was taken off life support and died in the hospital. And of course, that was incredibly tragic, but specifically for Murphy, he was hoping to get a chance to speak to her. She was, a potential treasure trove of information about how this whole thing happened. And now, of course, he would never get that chance. On July 11th, so 11 days after Dawn and Charlie first got sick, with Dawn now deceased and Charlie alive but still unable to talk, the agencies working on the case had managed to eliminate almost every location that Dawn and Charlie had visited as the source of this toxic substance, except for one, and that was Charlie's apartment. And so Murphy sent the forensics team back to the apartment to search it all over again. That afternoon, a lead officer with the forensics team stood in the middle of Charlie's small apartment alongside some of his colleagues. This lead officer and his team were all dressed in these very heavy-duty protective suits, so they moved slowly around the cramped space as they took samples of surfaces and bagged potential evidence. All the stuff, all the clutter in the apartment made it really hard to get around. There were clothes on the floor and open bags of fabric and dirty dishes stacked in the sink and on the counters and overflowing trash cans. And in the bedroom, there was a bunch of makeup and some hair dye boxes scattered on the floor, along with needles and other drug paraphernalia. There was not a ton of furniture in the apartment, but it was all over the place because paramedics had pushed it around during their response. And other areas of the place were littered with medical debris, like rubber gloves and plastic wrappers. And there was also just some trash and just kind of like random objects, water bottles, plastic toys, piled up on the windowsills. It was almost like there was literally too much in the apartment to even effectively test it all. But as the lead officer walked around doing his best to, identify things to be tested, something on a counter caught his eye. It was an object that looked very different from anything else in the apartment. Now, to understand what happened to Dawn and Charlie, you have to go back in time to 3.5 months before they got sick, when an unrelated older man and a younger woman were found unresponsive on a park bench in Salisbury and brought to the Salisbury District Hospital, the same one that Dawn and Charlie would go to. Now, this older man and the young woman, when they came into the hospital, they were experiencing seizures and they couldn't stop vomiting. But after being treated at the hospital, they actually both fully recovered. And at first, the doctors there, including Dr. Jukes, thought this man and woman were just regular civilians who had gotten sick, maybe from an overdose. But soon, it became clear that both of those things were not true. Number one, They were not just regular civilians. The older man was a Russian spy who had defected to England, and the young woman was his daughter. And they had definitely not overdosed. They had been poisoned. An investigation discovered that the substance that had been used to poison them was this very rare and deadly chemical weapon created by Russia called Novichok, a kind of nerve agent. And so 3.5 months later, after Dawn and Charlie were hospitalized and getting worse and worse, and then that lab tech rushed down the hallway to show Dr. Jukes their new lab results, it was Novichok, the deadly chemical that Dr. Jukes saw printed on the paper. That was in their system. Investigators in the spy poisoning case had never been able to figure out exactly how the poison had been administered to the spy and his daughter. But the item that Murphy's forensics team had found on the counter in Charlie's apartment, the one that kind of stood out and didn't really appear like it belonged in this space, was the item that ultimately solved that mystery. It would turn out Charlie actually found the source of the poison, unintentionally. It was that brand new bottle of perfume that he had given to Dawn on the morning they both got sick. Because Charlie hadn't actually bought this gift at a store, he couldn't have afforded it. Instead, he had found it in a dumpster during one of his many dumpster diving excursions. And that dumpster just so happened to be the exact same dumpster where a Russian agent had discarded the poison perfume after the attempted assassination. So when Dawn accepted Charlie's gift and sprayed it on her wrists in excitement, she had accidentally exposed herself and Charlie to the deadly nerve agent. Charlie would eventually recover from his exposure to Novichok. As for the 3 Russian agents that authorities suspect were involved in this thing, they went back to Russia and have never been prosecuted. And Russia has denied involvement in the poisoning.
Weird spooky Watsonville. Nestled in the heart of Watsonville, Pinto Lake has long been a place where the community comes together, slowing down and enjoying the outdoors. For generations, Pinto Lake has been part of everyday Watsonville life. And not just for families, but when I was in high school, I ran cross-country races to Pinto Lake and back. In fact, when I was younger, my church actually held our church picnics here. Pinto Lake was actually formed about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago and was a vital resource for the Ohlone people. Pinto Lake supported villages due to the abundant food and fresh water. And during the Portola expedition, they actually camped at Pinto Lake and they had journaled that it was a life-saving, lush environment. Even though Pinto Lake has always been a cherished part of the Watsonville community, there's another side to its story. Beneath the surface of this peaceful lake are years of darker and more mysterious events that have left us locals unsettled and wondering what really lingers here. Almost 40 years ago, Anita Mendoza Contreras claimed that she saw the Virgin at Pinto Lake. The shrine still stands today. In fact, after 38 years, the city did take it down and the community was in an uproar. They know that the Virgin Mary appeared there for a reason, especially because the dark and mysterious things continue to happen at Pinto Lake. In 2011, dozens of birds came up unalived all around Pinto Lake. At first, people thought that it was a disease, but then later realized that it was caused by blind fear. These birds had broken backs, broken beaks, there was red fluid all around them. Witnesses said that there were bodies scattered all over the roads nearby. But here's what didn't sit right with me. No one ever came forward saying they were hitting these birds with their cars. Instead, people were just saying that they were noticing these birds all over the ground. So maybe blind fear did happen. But the real question is, what were they really afraid of? And what could have caused dozens of birds to end up unalived and red fluid all around them like that? And in 2015, the body of a woman was found by a fisherman floating in the lake, which looked like she had been there for about a week. To this day, there has been no suspect to investigate. Maybe that's why people say that they see a lady in white at Pinto Lake now. When one place holds toxic waters, mysterious deaths, and sightings of the Virgin, at what point do you stop calling it a coincidence and start believing that something really is there?
When it comes to skinwalkers, New Mexico is number 1. Then you have Arizona, and third, I would say, is Texas. Now, more specifically, the western region of Texas has a significant number of skinwalker sightings. This specific story takes place outside of Odessa, Texas, right near the New Mexico border. There was this rancher named Roy. Roy purchased this 1,000-acre ranch, and when he first moves onto the property, he said he was confronted by this Native American man. And he said this man told him that on your property are these mounds. And he said, those are burial mounds. They are sacred to my people. Whatever you do, do not disturb them. He said, use all of the land, but leave those mounds alone. So Roy said, okay, whatever, I'm not anticipating touching them even. So after a year of Roy living on this ranch, he needed to expand and he needed to grow his ranch. So he started looking into this area where the mounds were. And one day he brings his tractor out there and gets ready to kind of clear this land. Well, as he started up his tractor and started to go towards the mound, he said he started to hear what sounded almost like Native American music and chants. And he said the closer he got to these mounds, the louder it got. And then finally, he said he heard a really loud, hey. And when he looked over out behind the mounds, he said there was a Native American man standing there. And he had these glowing eyes. And he was there for a brief second, and then he just disappeared. So Roy was like, okay, this is weird, like maybe I need to get some sleep. So he goes back to his house and he lays down. Well, later that night, he awakes to just kind of like a very stillness in the air. And he said that's when he heard very clearly something say, get out of here now. And a second time he hears it, get out of here now. And a third time, get out of here now. So he jumps up out of bed and he goes all around his house. He cannot find anyone. And he has no idea where this sound is coming from. And that's when he hears it a fourth time. And he goes over to his window in the bedroom. And when he looks out, he said he's seen this owl sitting up in the tree. And as he looked directly at this owl, it said, get out of here now. And then he said it flew off into the tree, up into the sky. So a couple weeks pass, and he's like, you know what? I got to clear that field. Like, I got to take out those mounds and expand the ranch. So he goes out there again with his tractor. And as he begins to start clearing these mounds, he said that's when he seen this pack of coyotes. And they started coming closer and closer towards him. And he noticed that their eyes were glowing. And he said they would not let him get anywhere near these mounds. And that scared him. So much so that he went back to the house and said, I will never touch those mounds again. And still to this day, those mounds sit there untouched.
Situated on top of Chateau Hill, this cemetery has views of the Mediterranean and a few ghosts. Watch this.
Wow, this tomb is insane. I'll try and get inside, but the camera lens adapts and changes. Whoa! See what I mean? Wait there, I'm gonna get you a good... Wow.
Welcome to Nice Cemetery in the south of France. Despite the blue skies, there's an eeriness in the air.
So, what on earth do you make of that clip? Was it a local person just messing around with me? Or was it something altogether more paranormal? Probably not, but it still made for a real shock. This is Cimetière du Château, built in 1783 after a law was introduced prohibiting burials within churches. So, where would the wealthiest people go? Atop of Chateau Hill. The oldest tombs from the early 19th century are in a neoclassical style, imitating Roman sarcophagi. The cemetery is a tourist spot as a result of its architectural beauty and the daily firing of a cannon at 12 noon. This tradition originated decades ago, still practiced to the modern day, originating when a British philanthropist would fire the cannon to let his wife know it was lunchtime no matter where she was in Nice. And that brings me to its first ghost. The spirit of this wealthy woman is still seen walking atop of the hill towards the cemetery, returning to be reunited with her husband as she did every 12 noon. The ghost of this tall, thin woman is wrapped in a burial shroud, and many never see her face, but feel her presence before she's even seen. Another infamous phantom is that of a wealthy French landowner who originally lived in Monaco and settled in Nice in the early 1900s. He ran his land with a tight fist and was not popular amongst the local people, and he continues to run the cemetery in this same fashion. It's down to his violent poltergeist-like activity that has resulted in Cimetière de Château being classed as one of the most haunted in France.
I thought they were just a normal follower at first. They started out like anyone else. They would like my videos right after I would post them. They would comment things like, "You're so pretty," or like, "I love your content." Then they started to be more specific. Like they would say, "You look more tired today," when I filmed the video that morning. Or, "I like that black hoodie more than I like the gray one." I hadn't posted a video in a gray one. That's when I went to their profile to check it out, and there was no posts, no followers, nothing to give anything. There was no profile picture. It was one of those usernames that just had a bunch of numbers in it. I ignored the whole thing, but that's when the DMs started. And they would DM me things like, "Why did you delete that video?" I hadn't deleted any video. I would go to my profile, and there would be a video that was deleted. No explanation, just missing. I assumed maybe I hit a violation or a guideline and they took it down, but I had no notification for that. Then another message came in, and it said, "You shouldn't film near your window at night." That's when my stomach dropped. Because I had filmed a draft the night before in my window. I never posted it. It was sitting in my drafts. So I went back to go check on it, and it was gone. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. I changed my passwords. I logged out of everything. I turned on two-factor authentication. For a couple of days, nothing happened, and I actually started to feel stupid, like I was being overreactive to something, until the next day. I was laying in bed scrolling, and it was dark outside, and I got a picture, and it was from the same user, and it was of my house. The picture was definitely taken from outside of my house. I freaked out. I sat up. I looked out my window. Didn't see anything. Everything looked normal. And then I got another text message. It said, "Check your drafts again." I didn't want to. I sat there frozen, just staring at my screen. After about a minute, I opened up the app and I went to my drafts. And in there was a video of me sleeping from inside of my room near the corner by my closet. At the very end of the video, the camera actually slowly turns, and you can see in the mirror somebody standing behind me. I called the police. They came, they searched. There was no sign of forced entry. There was nobody inside of the house, but one of the police officers said something that still rattles me to this day. He said, "Are you sure this wasn't recorded earlier?" I said, "No, I would have known." He just kind of nodded slowly and said, "Then how did they upload it 10 minutes before you received it?" I haven't slept since, and 2 days ago, I got another message from them, and it said, "You look better when you're awake."
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal experiences, or scary stories that you want to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. I'm a neurosurgeon. My entire life is based on science, which is why I still can't explain what happened to me on my first night in London. This happened back in 2008. I had just moved from Lebanon to London to start medical school at University College London. My flight landed late, around 11 p.m., and it was one of those heavy London nights. Rain pouring, streets shining under streetlights, everything colder than it should be. I was exhausted, jet-lagged, completely unfamiliar with the city. Before arriving, I had rented a small apartment for a month while I waited for my university housing. It was an old building near Russell Square. All I wanted that night was simple: get inside, sleep. I picked up the keys, took a car to the building, and the moment I stepped inside, I noticed how it felt. Not in a bad way necessarily, just aged. It was the kind of place where the walls feel like they'd seen things. The hallway smelled like old wood and history. I actually liked it. It reminded me of something out of a novel. The apartment itself was small, one bedroom, minimal furniture, a few pieces of art, some shelves, but honestly, I barely paid attention. I was too tired. I changed, washed up, and within minutes, I was in bed. Above me was a small window with thin curtains, little flowers printed on them. Even with the lights off, the street lamps outside lit the room just enough. Every now and then, passing headlights would slide across the walls and the bedroom door. I remember thinking I should get up and close the curtains, but I didn't. I just closed my eyes. And within seconds, something was wrong. My entire body went stiff. I couldn't move. The hairs on my arms stood up all at once, like a sudden shock had just run through me. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft, right next to me. Camellia. Hi. My eyes snapped open. My heart started racing immediately. I told myself it was nothing, just exhaustion, just jet lag, my brain playing tricks on me. But then it happened again, and closer this time. Camellia. And that's when the fear really hit me. Because no one in London knew my name. Not yet. I sat up instantly and ran to the bedroom door, throwing it open. The hallway was empty, completely silent. I know I had closed that door. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it, then slowly walked back into the room. At that point, I started quietly reciting verses under my breath, just something to ground myself, something familiar. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw him, standing right beside my bed. A man, young, thin, long hair, soft brown eyes. His clothes looked old, not dirty, just from another time. And the strangest part was that he didn't look threatening. He looked almost embarrassed, like he didn't mean to scare me. And then he spoke. Sorry, love. I know I'm bothering you. I've been living here for so long, I just couldn't believe you could see us. I had to say hi before I leave. My mind just stopped. I was staring at him, trying to force my brain to explain it, to rationalize it, to make it make sense. But nothing did. Then he gave a small wave, turned, and walked toward the door. I remember thinking, okay, maybe he's real, maybe there's a logical explanation, until he reached the wall and didn't stop. He didn't open the door. He didn't hesitate. He just kept walking, and passed straight through the space between the door and the wall, like it wasn't there at all. I didn't move for the rest of that night. I just sat there frozen, watching the doorway. At one point, I picked up my phone to call the landlord, but I stopped. Because what would I even say? Now I'm 36 years old. I'm a neurosurgeon. My entire life is built around science, around understanding the brain, logic, and evidence. But I still remember that night perfectly. Every detail. And the part that unsettles me the most isn't what I saw, it's what he said. He was surprised that I could see them. All of this, and a few years ago, I was talking to my mother about my childhood, just random memories. And she told me something that I had completely forgotten. She said that when I was little, she used to hear me talking in my room for long periods of time. She always assumed I had imaginary friends. But every time she asked who I was talking to, I gave her the same answer. People that you can't see.